Emboldened by Donald Trump, Benjamin Netanyahu is intensifying his war on Gaza. The US has blamed Hamas for the renewed Israeli bombardment of the Strip, but is Washington's support complicating efforts to reach a permanent peace? This is Inside Story. Hello again, I'm James Bays. There's been widespread international condemnation of Israel's renewed bombing of Gaza, including from the United Nations, but not from the Trump administration. The United States was the only country on the 15-member UN Security Council to back Israel's airstrikes at a meeting on Tuesday. Emboldened by support from President Donald Trump, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says negotiations with Hamas will only continue under fire. It comes as Itamar Ben-Gvir was reappointed as National Security Minister, a move likely to strengthen Netanyahu's coalition government. Where does this leave Hamas and the mediators? What options do they and the international community have to stop the violence? We'll talk to our panel of guests shortly, but first this report from Victoria Gatenby.
Less than 24 hours after Israel shattered the Gaza ceasefire it had agreed with Hamas, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu publicly thanked President Donald Trump for his unwavering support. He said Israel's alliance with the United States has never been stronger. He also said he would achieve all of his war goals in Gaza.
We have agreed on the military plan to go back to an intensified operation against Hamas. From now on, the negotiations will only continue under fire. I promise, this is only the beginning. We'll continue to fight to achieve our goals.
US support for Israel's renewed bombardment of Gaza is at odds with all other members of the UN Security Council. The Trump administration says so-called terrorists in the Middle East should take the president very seriously.
President Trump has made clear that Hamas must release the hostages immediately or pay a high price, and we support Israel in its next steps.
The reappointment of ultra-nationalist Itamar Ben-Gvir as National Security Minister is also likely to strengthen the coalition government. It comes at a time when public anger is growing at home and abroad.
They're trying to prolong their grasp of the reins over Israel now, destroy all of its democratic foundation, and move away from the hostages, which is the main thing that's supposed to be on the table.
Neighborhoods across Gaza are once again being reduced to rubble, and hospitals filling up with dead and injured. Palestinians are again being forcibly displaced. Hamas says Israel and the US will not succeed.
If they think such operations will change the agreement, they are delusional. Now, as they attempt to destroy this agreement, it will not lead to the results the Americans and Israelis hope for. That is why it is necessary for Americans to understand that this will only create more instability in the region.
Qatar, Turkey, Saudi Arabia and France are among the countries calling for an immediate return to a ceasefire. But Israel, emboldened by US President Trump, seems determined to continue its war. And Gaza, which is still reeling from 15 months of fighting, is engulfed in turmoil once again. Victoria Gatenby, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, let's bring in our panel of guests to discuss this further. From Washington, D.C., we're joined by Finucane, a senior advisor to the US program at the International Crisis Group. Danilo Della Valle is in Brussels. He's an Italian politician and member of the European Parliament for the Five Star Movement. And in Alexandria, Virginia, Yusuf Munir is head of the Palestine and Israel program and a senior fellow at the Arab Center in Washington, D.C. Thank you, all of you, for joining us. Let me start with you, Brian. In his TV address, the Israeli Prime Minister said Israel had resumed combat in full force. He said, this is only the beginning. It seems there's very little that's going to stop now, yet again, constant bombardment of Gaza.
Well, it certainly sounds as if from the White House's perspective that they consulted with the Israelis before the resumption in hostilities, and the White House gave Israel the green light. The White House is framing the resumption of fighting in Gaza as part of a wider campaign that the U.S. supports across the Middle East to push back against various Iran-backed groups. And it lumps together the resumption of fighting in Gaza with U.S. strikes over the weekend against the Houthis in Yemen. And so for the time being, the Trump administration seems to be enabling and supporting these operations in Gaza. That could, of course, change if the Trump administration has a change of heart. It could constrain these operations through withholding U.S. military support, arms transfers, just as the Biden administration could have done during the previous administration.
Danilo, it's perhaps worth taking our viewers back a little bit in time, because throughout last year, 2024, this deal, the one that ended up with the ceasefire, was in effect offered to the Israeli Prime Minister, and he'd found excuses not to sign it. It was only in January this year that, with pressure from the incoming Trump administration, that his hand was forced. Would you agree he never really wanted to sign this deal in the first place?
So in these days, Israel restarted, yes, to bomb Gaza, and this is for us. This is absurd for us, because it shows how also Trump statement show that for U.S. Israel is an ally also for the future, and we are talking a lot in Europe about the U.S. reducing its role in geopolitical scenario, but Trump continued to have Israel as ally in the Middle East, and of course it seems that Trump statement is like approve this massacre, genocide in live on TV, and it seems like an endorsement for us, and we are very worried that international community don't condemn this massacre, and it shows also the double standard about of Europe about this topic. For us, it's very, very important to talk about about Gaza and Palestine too problem, because we think that in this moment the international community have to show this humanity also about this problem.
Yusuf, if we go back to that beginning part of the ceasefire, just hours before the inauguration, it was Trump's envoy, his friend Steve Witkoff, who pushed this over the line. And if we remember that time, it seems at the time he pushed Netanyahu quite hard to get the deal. But in the 2 months since, would you agree, Israel has never fully complied. It never agreed to let all the quantities of aid that it was supposed to let in. It carried out repeated attacks during the ceasefire, and it's had a total siege since the beginning of March. No aid, no water, no food, no medical supplies allowed in. So why did Witkoff push so hard at the beginning, and why did that change? Why was the pressure eased by the US, in your view?
You're absolutely correct in terms of your summary of the context over the last several weeks that this initial phase of the so-called ceasefire has been in place. Israeli attacks in Gaza have led to the killing of some 150 Palestinians. So fire has certainly not ceased from that direction, and Palestinians have paid a heavy price for that. And of course, earlier this week, we saw the resumption of a serious escalation in Israeli bombardment that led to horrific images once again coming out of Gaza and huge numbers of casualties, particularly among children. In terms of your question about why is this happening and why was there sort of this push at the beginning, I think there was a confluence of interests at the outset. I think from the Palestinian end, they have long been seeking a ceasefire. This is something that the mediators have been very clear about. The Israelis previously had not been interested in it, but they saw some benefits, at least to a first phase of a ceasefire agreement at that particular moment, in part because, number one, they'd be able to grant an incoming president, Donald Trump, a gift on his inauguration day, setting relations between Israel and the Trump administration off to a very good start. But also the Israelis, and particularly Benjamin Netanyahu, saw a benefit in what I think they would call shrinking the problem of the hostages in Gaza. Looking at the first phase, they saw an opportunity to get a number of Israeli captives outside of Gaza while not committing to ending the war, which is something that would become necessary if they proceeded to the second phase. And so there was a confluence of interests in all three directions to at least move forward at that moment with the first phase of the ceasefire, but there was no commitment, no confluence of interests from all three parties beyond that, particularly from the Israeli side. And we've yet to see any sort of commitment from the American side, now managed, of course, by the Trump administration and Witkoff, to push the Israelis beyond that first phase.
Brian, I know you're not a psychologist, but I'd like perhaps to try and get inside President Trump's head here. If you listen to Trump, his instincts seem on this and on Ukraine and other things to favour peace. He says he wants the Nobel Peace Prize. He likes doing deals. But then on the other side of things, he doesn't like details, and he seems to be easily swayed by the people he talks to. The Israelis have clearly persuaded him right now, haven't they?
Yeah, I think that's all right. Trump has contradictory instincts and impulses. On the one hand, as you said, he likes diplomatic wins, being able to be seen as clinching the deal. He and his team were very happy to claim credit for the January ceasefire that came into effect before he took office. But since then, we've heard very different things. You know, we heard this horrifying proposal that Trump delivered while standing next to Benjamin Netanyahu about the ethnic cleansing of Gaza and turning it into the Riviera of the Mediterranean. Subsequently, we've seen reports of direct meetings between the envoy for hostage affairs for the U.S. government and Hamas to try to secure the release of U.S. hostages separate from the sort of ceasefire deal that's been worked out. And then, yeah, so Trump's also getting, his ear bent by Israeli officials and frankly, hawks within his own administration. And so he doesn't have a long attention span. He's not particularly interested in details. And so it leads to erratic U.S. policy in Gaza, as in so many other areas of foreign relations.
Danilo, we are getting a narrative from the White House that it was Hamas who was to blame for all of this. They rejected all the deals on the table. The reality is Hamas complied with the ceasefire, with phase one, did everything they were supposed to do in phase one. And what Hamas rejected were Israeli attempts to rewrite the deal. I want to ask you how this is being seen in Brussels and in Europe, across Europe. I mean, are people there accepting the US narrative that it was Hamas to blame, or do they see that actually there was a deal here and Hamas didn't breach it in any way?
For me, it seems a rhetoric problem, because I don't think that the only one problem about the ceasefire become to this question, to this, because honestly, the Palestinian children bombed. All of them are members of Hamas? This is the real question. So, how is possible that people, for me, can see it? And I think this is a rhetoric from that Trump and Israel is using to justify their operation against Palestinians, because for me the strategy is enough clear to take Gaza completely.
Yusuf, Brian has talked about some of the things that Trump has said in the last couple of months, including expelling all the Palestinians from Gaza and redeveloping it as a luxury resort. Do you think that Netanyahu now feels that he has a complete carte blanche, a complete green light to do whatever he wants, including, and is this likely, another ground incursion?
Well, I think he certainly feels that he has a lot of support. He's always had a lot of support from the United States. I do think, though, that one of the the challenges with a president like Donald Trump for Benjamin Netanyahu and for leaders all over the world is how erratic he seems to be. At one point, he may take one position, then he'll take another position. He'll negotiate deals on the phone with Vladimir Putin, start tariff wars with his allies. There's a high degree of unpredictability here. And I think that, anyone who watched, for example, what happened with President Zelensky when he came to visit the Oval Office, they understand that there's no way of entirely predicting what President Trump is capable of or he's going to do. And so I think even for Benjamin Netanyahu, who feels he has a tremendous amount of support and leverage within the United States and relationships within this administration, there is always this question of how long that may last. And I think to touch on a previous point, we know that this administration sent an envoy to speak directly with Hamas. This is something that was unprecedented and something that was approved by the President of the United States. The Israelis lost their minds over this. They got very upset, pushed back against it strongly. But this suggests that there is some doubt in the Trump administration about whether or not the Israelis really taking the lead on how this works out is something that is going to bear fruit. And I think that while President Trump is undoubtedly erratic, the one thing that he likes more than getting a Nobel Peace Prize or wanting to be seen as a peacemaker is making deals and being seen as winning. And he wants to be seen as doing the right thing here and coming out on top, getting these hostages out. And if he perceives that Benjamin Netanyahu is not helping towards that end, they may try other avenues. That may be what happened with the direct communication with Hamas. And what we may be seeing right now is the Americans essentially allowing the Israelis an opportunity to try to achieve progress in a different direction. This is what Netanyahu is asking for. Let me do this my way. We need to continue attacking, continue pressing. I need the support of my right-wing allies. This is the way to make progress. So Trump may be giving him an opportunity to do that, but if it doesn't bear fruit, one has to wonder how long the patience of Donald Trump will last.
Brian, we heard just there Yusuf make a comparison with Ukraine. On Ukraine, Trump supporters, I've heard sometimes say that, OK, he's not being fully supportive of Zelensky. That's because he needs to be even-handed, fair, so that the negotiations work, so the US is an honest broker. But it's so different in this file, and it's always been so different, hasn't it?
It has, and it's notable the approach that the United States is taking to military support for Ukraine versus Israel. In the case of Ukraine, of course, the United States paused intelligence sharing, paused arms transfers to Ukraine in order to try to compel the Ukrainian government to enter into negotiations in a way that the White House viewed as favorable. That has not been the case at all with respect to Israel. And in fact, Secretary of State Rubio has authorized under special emergency procedures the transfer of thousands of precision guide munitions to Israel. And so the United States has not used any sort of military leverage with Israel to try to compel it to, continue the ceasefire. As we've just heard, that could change. The administration could reassess where its interests lie, and the president may try to take a different tack if he wants to, secure the release, at least of the American hostages still being held in Gaza. So again, it's subject to change at any moment, and this is the nature of the administration that we're dealing with.
Normally, when there is an international crisis, two of the things that have leverage on the situation are the views of the international community and the status of the legality under international law. Danilo, I'd like to ask you first about the first of those, which is the views of the international community. The UN Security Council met on Tuesday. The US was the only one of the 15 members to support Israel's decision to break the ceasefire and renew the war. The rest of the world is pretty united, but it's not going to make any difference to the situation, is it?
Yes, totally agree. I won't speak because I'm a member of the European Parliament. I won't speak also about what European Parliament, the international community is doing right now. Absolutely nothing. No formal condemnation for what Israel is doing, and it's for us, European Union in particular, is facing the double standard of its work because, for example, we spoke 5 times in plenary about the Georgian election because the majority of this parliament didn't recognize the results of the election in Georgia. And never we voted a resolution about Palestine, about what's happened in Gaza. Never we discussed about it. We had one discussion about in plenary about Gaza and another one about Lebanon, just because Israel shot on UNIFIL mission. And for us, it is absurd because now we are discussing in this parliament to spend 800 billion euros to defend ourselves by a treaty, but we discussed a lot about Georgia, about other problems. We used the rhetoric of invasor and invaded, but this rhetoric disappeared suddenly when the Palestinian topic came out. So I think in this moment, international community and in particular European Union are doing nothing, not enough.
Okay, well that's the international community that could perhaps put pressure on the situation. Brian, before your current job, you work for the State Department. You're an expert in international law. International law has already spoken. We've had the two top courts in the world. We've had the International Court of Justice, the top court in the UN system, which is ordered that humanitarian aid must be let in, that the offensive must stop, that Israel must even stop its occupation. And we have the International Criminal Court with an arrest warrant for Prime Minister Netanyahu. And among the crimes he was accused of in that arrest warrant was the crime of starvation, and he's not letting aid in again, and of an attack against the civilian population, which we've seen again in recent hours. International law is being shredded here, is it not?
Certainly under severe strain. And I think what you've said is all correct. And recent developments in Gaza are only going to feed into both the genocide case before the International Court of Justice and the individual criminal examinations that the ICC is undertaking, particularly relating to the use of starvation as a weapon of war. I also want to add that a number of other states may also have jurisdiction over war crimes that are committed in Gaza. And so Israeli military officials, Israeli military personnel, government ministers may all face potential criminal exposure if they travel abroad with respect to actions taken in Gaza. But international law faces real challenges, as I indicated, in part because of the backing that Israel currently enjoys from the United States. And the United States has taken steps to hamper the ICC, placing the ICC's prosecutor under sanctions and continuing to provide arms to Israel, notwithstanding international and domestic legal restrictions on such transfers.
Yusuf, it's not clear to me that Netanyahu has any other plan than just continuing this war. Is that perhaps the best case scenario, that Trump, who campaigned against endless wars in the Middle East, is going to get bored with what Netanyahu is doing and demand that he halts it?
Perhaps. I mean, I think you're right about the assessment that Netanyahu is not interested in ending this war. You have to remember that what happened on October 7th was the most significant failure of the Israeli security establishment in the history of the state of Israel. And he was prime minister on that day. And he continues to be prime minister now. And most of the people who were responsible for Israeli security on that day have taken some form of accountability, either by acknowledging their failures publicly, launching investigations into the failures that took place, and or resigning as well. But of course, the person at the top of the Israeli security establishment, the prime minister, has been trying to avoid accountability for the failures of that day for as long as possible. Continuing the war in Gaza is his way of putting off that eventuality for as long as possible. And there is nothing more important to Benjamin Netanyahu than his own personal political survival. And if you pay attention to Israeli media, this is a theme that is loud and clear in Israeli domestic politics and is reaching a fever pitch even at this moment, as thousands of Israelis are protesting against the government's return to war after watching for several weeks hostages coming out through a negotiated agreement. It's becoming increasingly clear that Netanyahu's interest is really what is driving these decisions more than anything else. And it's certainly possible that at some point, Donald Trump may realize this and get tired of it.
Thank you very much, Brian. Thank you to all our guests today, Brian Finucane, Danilo, Della, Valle and Yusuf Munir. Updates from the ground from our team in Gaza continue around the clock. Stay tuned. And remember, for further analysis, go to our website, aljazeera.com. If you have comments or suggestions, please go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Or on X, find us at AJ Inside Story. From me, James Bays, and the team here in Doha, stay safe. Bye-bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.